Have you ever wondered if your kindness is actually making you vulnerable rather than protected? Are you sacrificing your own power for the sake of being nice? Now, let me ask you something that might shake the very foundation of how you see the world. Do you truly believe that kindness alone will keep you safe in this world? That simply being nice, generous, and accommodating will guarantee loyalty, respect, and fair treatment from others? If you answered yes, you're about to confront one of the most painful truths society has embedded in your mind. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Has this ever happened to you? You stay late at work to help a colleague, and soon it becomes expected rather than appreciated. You consistently put others first, only to find yourself last in line when you need support. You avoid conflict to maintain peace, yet somehow end up being the one who's disrespected. If these scenarios sound painfully familiar, you're not alone. The harsh reality, one that many refuse to acknowledge, is that our world doesn't naturally reward kindness. It rewards those who know how to use kindness as a strategic tool, who understand when to be generous and when to establish boundaries. Stay with me until the end, because this distinction is crucial for your success and well-being. Centuries ago, Niccolo Machiavelli observed this truth playing out in the most dramatic fashion. He watched as merciful kings were betrayed by those they spared, as generous rulers were overthrown by ungrateful subjects, and as honest leaders were outmaneuvered by those willing to deceive. His famous work, The Prince, wasn't written as a moral guide, but as a survival manual for navigating a world filled with wolves ready to pounce on any sign of weakness. What you're about to discover might surprise you, even disturb you. Think about your own experiences for a moment. How many times have you extended yourself for others only to be taken advantage of? How many times have you chosen silence over confrontation only to lose respect? How many times have you given everything to someone who disappeared the moment you needed something in return? This pattern isn't coincidental. It's the predictable outcome of misunderstanding the true nature of kindness in a competitive world. Machiavelli didn't advocate for cruelty, he advocated for wisdom. He understood that kindness without strategy is like a sword without a wielder, powerful in potential but useless in practice. In the next few minutes, I'm going to reveal the 8 cold truths about kindness that most people never confront. These insights will transform how you interact with others, how you establish boundaries, and ultimately how you claim the power and respect you deserve. The first truth might be the most shocking of all. If you're ready to master the art of strategic power, hit subscribe now and join thousands of others transforming their approach to influence and success. Truth number 1. Kindness doesn't protect you, it exposes you. This revelation might feel like a punch to the gut, but it's a hidden truth that successful people have understood for centuries. When you consistently display unlimited kindness, you're not wearing armor. You're wearing a sign that says, "I am easy to exploit." The transformation begins the moment you establish yourself as the person who never says no. Think about it. In nature, predators don't attack the strongest in the herd. They identify the weakest, the most vulnerable, the least likely to resist. And in human society, those who display boundless kindness often become prime targets. This isn't because kindness itself is a flaw, but because unrestrained kindness signals a mindset that values others' comfort above your own boundaries. The journey from being respected to being taken advantage of happens through an almost invisible shift. The first time you stay late to help a colleague, they're genuinely grateful. "Thank you so much, I couldn't have done this without you." But by the 3rd time, the gratitude diminishes. By the 10th time, it's gone entirely. What was once appreciated becomes expected. What was once a favor becomes your obligation. This psychological pattern affects nearly every relationship where one person consistently gives more than they receive. The impact is devastating because it happens so gradually that you barely notice the ground shifting beneath your feet. One day you realize that your generosity is no longer met with appreciation. It's met with entitlement. Behind the scenes of this transformation is a fundamental aspect of human nature. We value what is rare. When your kindness becomes as predictable as the sunrise, it loses its perceived worth. People don't treasure what they can have anytime, anywhere, with minimal effort. They treasure what requires effort to obtain, what isn't guaranteed, what must be earned. I once witnessed this in a workplace setting that illustrates the principle perfectly. A talented designer would regularly help everyone on her team with their projects. Initially, they were amazed by her generosity. 6 months later, they would drop work on her desk, without even asking, treating her as an extension of their own productivity rather than a colleague deserving respect. Her endless kindness didn't build a shield, it dismantled her boundaries. The revelation here isn't that you should abandon kindness altogether. That would be missing the point entirely. Rather, it's understanding that kindness must be strategic, conscious, and occasionally withheld to maintain its value and your position. When kindness becomes rare, it becomes powerful. When it's unexpected, it creates impact. When it's strategic, it builds respect rather than dependency. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by examining a real-life example that perfectly illustrates how this principle plays out in professional settings, where the stakes are often highest and the consequences most visible. If you're starting to recognize this pattern in your own life, write in the comments, "I've been the kind one." I'm curious how many of you have experienced this. You firsthand. The most painful truth about constant helpfulness is this: those who always say yes become paradoxically invisible. I call this the forgotten helper syndrome, and its psychological impact runs deeper than most realize. When people know with absolute certainty that you'll always be available, that your help is guaranteed regardless of circumstances, you transform from a valued resource into a background utility, like electricity or running water, only noticed when absent. Let me share a revealing story that perfectly captures this principle in action. There was a manager at a growing tech company who embodied the essence of selfless leadership. For 3 years, he protected his team from upper management pressure, volunteered for difficult conversations, stayed late to help struggling team members, and even declined a promotion opportunity because it would have split his department. His dedication created a seamless experience for everyone around him. The pivotal moment came when the company needed to appoint a new director. Despite his unmatched knowledge of the operation and years of sacrifice, they passed him over. The position went to someone with half his experience, but twice his assertiveness. Someone who had built a reputation for being firm, occasionally difficult, but always respected. When asked about the decision, the CEO's response was illuminating. "We need someone who can lead, not just serve." This watershed moment reveals a fundamental misalignment between our idealistic view of leadership and the reality of human psychology. Behind the scenes of every promotion decision lies this unspoken truth: excessive kindness registers as servitude, not strength. The endless availability signals that you've accepted a subordinate position in the relationship hierarchy. Machiavelli captured this dilemma centuries ago with his brilliant metaphor about the lion and the fox. "The lion cannot escape traps," he observed, "and the fox cannot defend against wolves." His insight wasn't promoting cruelty, it was a revelation about survival in complex social environments. To thrive, you must embody both qualities: the strength of the lion that commands respect, and the strategic cunning of the fox that avoids exploitation. The journey toward balanced power requires this dual consciousness. Most kind-hearted people resist this reality, clinging to the belief that pure goodness will eventually be recognized and rewarded. But that resistance comes at a devastating personal cost. Every day you spend as a sheep among wolves, you sacrifice not just your resources, but your very influence to create positive change. Consider how many gentle, well-meaning people you've known who were sidelined, overlooked, or exploited. Their transformative potential remained unrealized precisely because they rejected the strategic dimension of human interaction. Their mindset, while admirable in theory, rendered them ineffective in practice. Don't leave your success to chance. Subscribe now to arm yourself with the timeless wisdom that separates true leaders from those who merely hope for respect. What's truly fascinating is how this pattern transcends cultures and contexts. Whether in corporate America, academic institutions, or even family dynamics, the same principle applies. Those who combine kindness with strategic boundaries wield far more influence than those who offer kindness without limits. Now, I want to examine the counterintuitive solution to this problem. A solution that might initially feel uncomfortable, but ultimately creates the respect we all desire. If you've ever felt like your kindness was taken for granted while watching less helpful people get ahead, write in the comments, "I've been overlooked." It's time we acknowledge this widespread experience, so let's pause for a moment of honest reflection. Have you ever felt like someone's doormat? Perhaps it was in your workplace, where your willingness to take on extra assignments became an expectation rather than a choice. Maybe it was in a friendship, where you became the constant shoulder to cry on, but when you needed support, suddenly everyone was busy. Or within family dynamics, where your reliability made you the default problem solver while others escaped responsibility. This doormat sensation isn't just uncomfortable. It's a warning signal from your subconscious that something fundamental is out of balance. The courage to acknowledge this feeling marks the first milestone in your personal revolution, because until you name the pattern, you remain trapped within it, constantly repeating the same cycle of giving, being depleted, and feeling resentful. The breakthrough realization that changed my own journey was understanding that I didn't need to abandon kindness. I needed to transform it. The solution isn't becoming cold or callous. It's making your kindness rare. This subtle shift in approach completely alters how others perceive and value what you offer. Think about anything precious in this world: gold, diamonds, even time with someone you admire. What gives these things value? Their scarcity. When your kindness becomes an occasional gift rather than a constant service, it undergoes a remarkable metamorphosis. What was once taken for granted suddenly carries weight. What was invisible becomes noticed. What was expected becomes appreciated. This insight illuminates the fundamental misconception about Machiavelli's teachings. Behind the controversial reputation lies a profound understanding of human psychology. He never advocated abandoning virtue or embracing cruelty for its own sake. Instead, he recognized that kindness wielded strategically becomes exponentially more powerful than kindness given indiscriminately. The mindset shift required here is subtle but revolutionary, moving from reactive kindness to deliberate kindness. When someone asks for your help, instead of automatically saying yes, pause. Consider, is this the right moment? Is this the right request? Will this action build respect or reinforce exploitation? This thoughtful evaluation doesn't diminish your generosity. It enhances its impact. I witnessed a perfect example of this principle when observing a highly respected executive who was known for both her compassion and her boundaries. When team members brought problems to her, she didn't immediately solve them. She asked, "What solutions have you considered?" When asked for favors, she sometimes said, "Not this time, but I can help with something else later." Her selective assistance became more valuable precisely because it wasn't guaranteed. The revelation here challenges our cultural programming about kindness. We've been taught that constant availability signals virtue, when in fact it often signals a lack of self-valuation. The journey toward powerful kindness begins with recognizing that your time, energy, and assistance are precious resources, not unlimited utilities to be freely consumed by whoever demands them. This strategic approach to kindness creates a fascinating paradox. By occasionally saying no, your yeses become more meaningful. By sometimes withdrawing, your presence becomes more valued. By setting boundaries, your generosity becomes more respected. Now let's explore the second transformative truth about generosity that most people never discover. A truth that explains why constant giving can actually make others resent you rather than appreciate. If you've realized it's time to make your kindness more strategic and less automatic, write in the comments, "Value my kindness." I'm interested in how many of you are ready for this mindset shift. Truth number 2 reveals one of the most counterintuitive aspects of human psychology. Excessive generosity doesn't make you more beloved. It often makes you despised. This paradox has confused kind-hearted people for centuries, leaving them bewildered when their abundant giving results not in appreciation, but in resentment. The mechanism behind this phenomenon is fascinating. When you first offer something valuable, your time, your resources, your support, the recipient experiences genuine gratitude. There's an emotional high, a moment of connection and appreciation. But with each subsequent act of giving, a subtle transformation occurs. The neurochemical reward of gratitude diminishes. What was once extraordinary becomes ordinary. What was once a gift becomes an entitlement. This creates what psychologists might call the generosity trap, a self-reinforcing cycle that becomes increasingly difficult to escape. You establish a pattern of giving, others adapt their expectations to that pattern, and then you find yourself locked in a prison of your own making. The most perverse aspect of this trap reveals itself the moment you stop giving. Suddenly, all your previous generosity is erased from memory. The narrative shifts instantly from "look at everything they've done for me" to "look at the one thing they wouldn't do for me." I've observed this dynamic playing out in countless environments, but perhaps nowhere is it more visible than in family relationships. Consider how children respond to gifts. The first new toy produces jumping, screaming excitement. The second gift still receives an enthusiastic "thank you." By the 10th gift, the response has diminished to a casual nod of acknowledgement. But the true revelation comes when, after this pattern is established, you finally say no to the 11th request. Suddenly you're faced not with understanding, but with accusations of unfairness, as if the previous 10 gifts never existed. This cognitive blindness to past generosity isn't malicious. It's a fundamental feature of how human beings process expectations and disappointments. The watershed moment in my own journey of understanding was realizing that this pattern transcends age, culture, and context. The colleague who's received 9 deadline extensions will forget them all when denied the 10th. The friend who's been bailed out financially multiple times will focus only on the one time you couldn't help. The enlightenment comes when you realize this isn't about the recipients being ungrateful people. It's about the psychological infrastructure of expectations. When your giving becomes predictable, it transitions from the domain of gifts to the domain of rights. The very consistency of your generosity undermines its perceived value, creating the Paradox, where more giving leads to less appreciation. This realization doesn't mean you should stop being generous altogether. Rather, it invites a more sophisticated approach to giving, one that honors both your natural inclination toward kindness and the psychological reality of how that kindness is received. By introducing unpredictability and selectivity into your generosity, you restore its power to generate genuine appreciation. But this understanding leads us to an even deeper question about the relationship between appearance and reality in how others perceive us. Because even with the best intentions, the world doesn't see your heart. It only sees how you present yourself. If you've experienced the frustration of having your past generosity forgotten the moment you set a boundary, write in the comments, "Generosity trap recognized." It's time we acknowledged this universal pattern. This workplace pattern mirrors our family example with striking precision. Consider the employee who consistently stays late to finish projects. The first few times, the boss notices and praises their dedication. Your commitment to this team is remarkable. But what happens after a month of this behavior? The praise disappears. After 3 months, staying late isn't seen as going above and beyond. It's simply become your baseline performance. Then comes the inevitable moment of reckoning, the one day you need to leave on time for a personal commitment. Rather than understanding, you're met with disappointment or even subtle disapproval. "Leaving already?" your manager asks with a raised eyebrow, completely blind to your previous months of sacrifice. This isn't because your manager is inherently ungrateful. It's because human perception naturally adjusts to patterns and creates new baselines of expectation. The psychological principle at work here reveals a fundamental truth about human nature. We instinctively value what is scarce. This isn't just a modern capitalist construct, it's wired into our evolutionary psychology. Think about it in material terms. Gold and diamonds aren't valuable because they're particularly useful in daily life. They're valuable because they're rare. Apply this same principle to your kindness and availability, and you'll witness a transformation in how others perceive what you offer. Machiavelli recognized this centuries ago when he advised that benefits should be conferred gradually so that they may be better enjoyed. He understood the paradox that stretching out your giving actually increases its perceived value, while abundant generosity diminishes its own worth. Each act of kindness becomes more impactful when it isn't immediately followed by another, allowing the recipient to fully experience the gratitude before it fades. Perhaps the most painful manifestation of this truth is what I call the abandonment paradox, the pattern where consistent givers find themselves alone when they finally need support. You've experienced this if you've ever been the reliable friend who drops everything to help others move, provide emotional support, or solve problems, only to discover an empty landscape when you send out your own call for help. The revelation isn't just that others are selfish, it's that your pattern of constant giving has trained them to see you as a provider rather than as someone who might occasionally need something in return. The ultimate betrayal comes when you finally set a boundary. After years of giving, the moment you say, "I can't this time," all your previous generosity is instantly forgotten. You're met not with understanding, but with accusations of selfishness, as if the ledger of your giving has been wiped clean by a single refusal. This instant revision of history isn't conscious malice. It's the unconscious human tendency to fixate on what we're denied rather than what we've received. This realization can feel deeply disheartening, but within it lies the seed of your empowerment. Understanding the psychology behind these patterns gives you the awareness to break free from them, to establish new dynamics where your kindness is valued precisely because it isn't unlimited. But this transformation requires more than just understanding. It requires a fundamental shift in how you approach giving itself. If you've ever felt the sting of being abandoned by the very people you've consistently helped, write in the comments, "I've been there." Let's acknowledge this. Shared experience that so few people discuss openly. So how do we break free from these patterns? The answer lies in a profound mindset shift, transforming generosity from an unconscious habit into a deliberate strategy. This isn't about becoming less generous, it's about becoming more intentional with your giving. When you thoughtfully choose the right moment, the right person, and the right reason for your generosity, each act carries exponentially more weight than a dozen careless automatic yeses. Think of your generosity as an investment portfolio rather than an unlimited checking account. A wise investor doesn't randomly pour resources into whatever opportunity appears first. They carefully evaluate potential returns, timing, and risk factors. Your kindness deserves the same strategic consideration. Ask yourself, will this particular act of giving strengthen this relationship or enable dependency? Will my assistance empower the recipient or merely postpone their own growth? Is this the optimal moment for my generosity to create maximum impact? The revelation that transformed my own approach was understanding that refusal isn't inherently selfish. It's often necessary for maintaining balance and respect. Every time you say no to something that doesn't align with your values or boundaries, you're saying yes to your own well-being and dignity. This selective approach doesn't diminish your kindness. It amplifies its significance when you do choose to give. I witnessed this principle in action through a mentor who was widely respected despite, or perhaps because of, his selective approach to helping others. When asked for assistance, he would carefully consider not just whether he could help, but whether his help was the right solution at that moment. His occasional no carried no apology or guilt because he understood that boundaries aren't walls designed to keep others out. They're filters designed to let the right exchanges in. The darkest consequence of unlimited generosity reveals itself in what I call the depletion paradox. When you give without limits, you don't just exhaust your resources, you transform yourself into a utility that others drain until nothing remains. The tragic irony is that even as you empty yourself, those taking from you remain perpetually unsatisfied. Like drinking salt water, consuming someone else's unlimited giving creates not satiation, but increasing thirst. The psychological architecture behind this phenomenon is fascinating. When others can access your resources without effort or appreciation, those resources lose their perceived value. No matter how much you give, it will never be enough, because what comes too easily is never truly valued. Meanwhile, your own reserves, whether of time, energy, attention, or material resources, steadily diminish until you have nothing left to give, not even to yourself. This journey toward strategic kindness requires courage, the courage to withstand momentary disapproval. When you set boundaries, to risk being temporarily misunderstood, when you refuse unreasonable requests. But this courage creates the foundation for relationships based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. Now we need to explore an even more fundamental truth about how the world perceives kindness and virtue, a truth that explains why the most genuinely good-hearted people are often the least respected in society. If you're realizing it's time to transform your generosity from automatic to strategic, write in the comments, strategic giver. I'd love to know how many of you are ready to make this crucial shift. Truth number 3 takes us into the realm of perception, a domain where intentions count for far less than we've been taught to believe. Here's a revelation that might feel uncomfortable. No matter how pure your heart, how noble your intentions, or how genuine your character, the world doesn't see your inner reality. It only sees and judges your external appearance and behavior. This insight struck me with particular force during a leadership seminar where the instructor demonstrated how people form impressions within seconds of meeting someone new. Those initial judgments, based on posture, eye contact, tone of voice, even subtle facial micro-expressions, become the foundation for how your words and actions are interpreted from that point forward. The transformation in how attendees were perceived after learning to adjust these signals was nothing short of remarkable. Machiavelli understood this psychological mechanism centuries before modern science confirmed it. "Everyone sees what you appear to be," he wrote. "Few experience what you really are." This wasn't cynicism. It was a clear-eyed assessment of how power dynamics form in human relationships. The perception of your strength or weakness shapes how others interact with you far more than your actual qualities. In today's accelerated environment, this dynamic has only intensified. People don't have the time or cognitive bandwidth to carefully assess your true nature. They rely on quick visual and behavioral shortcuts to categorize you, leader or follower, confident or insecure, worthy of respect or easy to dismiss. These snap judgments aren't just superficial impressions. They become the framework through which all your future actions are filtered. I witnessed this principle in action when observing two equally qualified job candidates interviewing for the same position. The first had impeccable credentials, but entered the room with slightly hunched shoulders, spoke softly, and frequently qualified his statements with phrases like, "I think," or "maybe." The second candidate, with identical qualifications, maintained strong posture, spoke with deliberate pacing, and expressed ideas with conviction. Despite identical substance in their answers, the perception gap was unmistakable. The first appeared unsure, despite being knowledgeable. The second appeared authoritative, despite sharing the same information. Behind the scenes of these judgments lies a fundamental truth about human cognition. We process visual and behavioral cues far more quickly and powerfully than we process verbal content. Long before someone consciously evaluates what you're saying, their subconscious has already categorized who you are based on how you present yourself. The revelation here isn't that you should become inauthentic or manipulative. Rather, it's understanding that managing perception isn't deception, it's communication. Just as you choose your words carefully to convey meaning, you must choose your presentation carefully to ensure that meaning is received as intended. Your kindness and competence remain invisible if your exterior signals weakness or uncertainty. This awareness creates a pathway toward aligning your outer presentation with your inner reality, ensuring that your true value isn't masked by unhelpful signals. But this alignment requires understanding a deeper truth about the hidden costs of your choices, especially when it comes to saying yes when you should say no. If you've ever felt the disconnect between how you see yourself and how others perceive you, write in the comments. Perception gap. I'm curious how many have experienced this fundamental misalignment. The most unsettling discovery along this journey is the stark divide between who you are and how you're perceived. The world doesn't care about your true nature. It cares about what it can see. You might possess remarkable intelligence, unshakable integrity, and boundless kindness. But if your exterior projects weakness or excessive accommodation, that's exactly how you'll be treated. Your inner qualities remain invisible if your presentation contradicts them. I observed this principle play out dramatically with a brilliant colleague whose insights were consistently overlooked in meetings simply because his soft-spoken manner and tendency to phrase ideas as questions signaled uncertainty to others. The transformation when he began consciously adjusting his presentation, maintaining eye contact, speaking in definitive statements, taking up physical space, was immediate. The same ideas that were previously ignored suddenly commanded attention and respect. This revelation illuminates a critical misunderstanding about Machiavelli's teachings. He wasn't advocating deception. He was pioneering the concept of strategic image management. Consider the metaphor of a skilled surgeon who appears cruel in the moment of cutting into flesh, but is performing the highest act of kindness by saving a life. Sometimes, appearing firm or even harsh on the surface is necessary to protect what's good at your core. The identity shift required here challenges our cultural programming about authenticity. We've been taught that constant transparency about our feelings and impulses represents honesty, when in fact, conscious management of our presentation is essential for effective communication. Think about it this way: you carefully choose your words to convey meaning. Why wouldn't you equally curate your physical presence, your tone, and your boundaries to ensure that meaning is received? Perhaps the most liberating aspect of this understanding is realizing that your kindness doesn't need to be displayed constantly to be real. Sometimes shielding it behind a cooler exterior makes it more valued when revealed. This selective approach isn't fake, it's strategic. Just as a rare gem commands more attention than common stones, your occasional deliberate acts of generosity carry more weight than constant expected giving. I witnessed a perfect example in an executive who was known for being tough but fair. Her occasional moments of warmth and support meant more to her team precisely because they weren't constant or predictable. When she offered help, it wasn't from obligation, but from genuine choice, and that distinction transformed how her generosity was perceived and valued. The mindset revolution here isn't about becoming someone you're not. It's about becoming a more effective version of who you already are. It's understanding that managing perception isn't manipulative. It's necessary for your true value to be seen and respected. But this awakening leads us to another profound truth about the hidden costs we pay when we fail to value ourselves properly. If you've recognized that you need to manage how your kindness is perceived rather than displaying it constantly, write in the comments, strategic presence. I'm curious how many are ready to take control of their image. You are indeed the director of your own image. This realization marks a turning point in reclaiming your personal power. While remaining true to your authentic self, you can strategically choose when, where, and with whom to reveal different aspects of your character. This selective disclosure isn't manipulation. It's intelligent self-presentation. The most respected figures in history understood this principle intuitively. They didn't display every emotion or reaction in real time, but curated their presentation to align with their goals. This control becomes essential when we confront the fourth truth. Everything in life carries a price. This is perhaps the most sobering revelation for habitually kind people. Every time you say yes when your heart screams no, you're not just making a momentary decision. You're paying with irreplaceable currency. Your time, your energy, your focus, ultimately pieces of your very life. These silent transactions often go unnoticed until the account is empty. The hidden costs accumulate invisibly. That extra hour helping a colleague who could have solved the problem themselves. That weekend spent on someone else's project while yours remains unfinished. That emotional labor absorbing another's crisis while your own needs remain unaddressed. Each decision seems small in isolation, but together they constitute a massive withdrawal from your limited life capital. I had a profound breakthrough when I visualized my personal resources as actual currency. Imagine having exactly 86,400 seconds to spend each day. No more, no less. How many of those would you willingly give to activities that drain rather than fulfill you? To people who consistently take without reciprocating, to obligations that align with neither your values nor your goals. This mental framework transforms how you evaluate requests for your time and energy. The harsh reality is that your resources aren't unlimited. You possess a finite reserve of attention, creativity, emotional capacity, and physical energy. Every sacrifice depletes this capital, and without conscious replenishment, you eventually reach bankruptcy. At that point, you're no longer a source of support. You become what Machiavelli might call a living corpse, exhausted and empty, with nothing left to give, not even to yourself or those who truly deserve your gifts. This depletion happens so gradually that many don't recognize it until they've reached critical emptiness. The transformation is subtle. Enthusiasm fades to obligation, joy diminishes to endurance, purpose degrades to mere function. The person who once had vision, energy, and impact becomes a hollow shell going through motions, all because they failed to recognize the cumulative price of their choices. What makes this particularly insidious is that society actively encourages this self-depletion, especially from naturally giving people. The narrative that sacrifice equals virtue creates the perfect environment for exploitation. But there's a profound difference between meaningful sacrifice for worthy causes and mindless depletion for whoever happens to make demands on your resources. Now let's examine what happens when we completely ignore these natural limits and continue giving beyond our capacity. A pattern that leads not just to personal depletion, but to a form of invisible self-destruction that masquerades as virtue. If you've started to recognize the hidden costs you've been paying with your time and energy, write in the comments, counting the cost. I want to know how many are awakening to this crucial awareness. This leadership paradox Machiavelli identified cuts to the heart of why naturally kind people often struggle to advance. He who wishes to be obeyed must know how to command, he observed. Yet commanding effectively requires a reserve of energy, clarity, and presence that constant people-pleasing systematically depletes. A tired mind cannot make decisive choices. An emotionally drained spirit cannot inspire others. A depleted individual cannot project the quiet confidence that true leadership demands. Think about the leaders who've influenced you most profoundly. Were they constantly exhausted, overwhelmed, and scattered? Or did they possess a centered presence, a reservoir of calm energy that allowed them to focus fully on the situation at hand? Leadership isn't just about position or title, it's about energy management. When you're constantly running on empty from overcommitment, you may still hold a leadership role, but you've surrendered the essence of leadership itself. This principle appears throughout our world in surprising places. Consider the universal safety briefing on every commercial flight. In the event of a loss of cabin pressure, oxygen masks will descend. Secure your own mask before assisting others. This instruction isn't promoting selfishness, it's acknowledging practical reality. If you pass out from lack of oxygen while trying to help others, you become not a rescuer, but another victim requiring rescue. This oxygen mask metaphor perfectly captures the mindset shift required for sustainable impact. The transformation begins when you recognize that taking care of your own needs first isn't selfish. It's the prerequisite for truly helping others. Yet how many of us live the exact opposite? We rush to give metaphorical oxygen to everyone around us while we ourselves are quietly suffocating. The emotional toll of this pattern reveals itself in subtle ways. The growing resentment when you say yes but mean no. The quiet bitterness that emerges when you abandon your own aspirations to fulfill others' expectations. The creeping realization that your life is being lived according to someone else's priorities. These emotions aren't character flaws. They're warning signals from your deepest self that boundaries have been violated. Each time you sacrifice your dreams to chase someone else's objectives, you're making a profound exchange, trading irreplaceable moments of your finite life for something that often doesn't truly matter to you. This isn't about occasional compromise or meaningful sacrifice for those you love. It's about the systematic surrender of your life force to demands that drain rather than fulfill you. I've witnessed countless journeys of awakening as people. Begin to inventory these hidden costs. One particularly striking transformation involved a colleague who had built her entire identity around being helpful. The watershed moment came when she realized she could name everyone else's goals and dreams in vivid detail, but struggled to articulate her own. This revelation sparked a fundamental shift in how she allocated her most precious resource, her attention. If you felt that creeping resentment from saying yes when your heart wanted to scream, no, write in the comments, taking back my yes. I want to know how many are ready to reclaim their power of choice. The fundamental misconception about kindness that keeps so many trapped in cycles of depletion is viewing it as an infinite resource. We've been conditioned to believe our capacity for giving is limitless, that kindness flows like an endless river that can never run dry. But the psychological reality is quite different. Kindness isn't an endless river. It's a lake with finite boundaries. Without conscious replenishment, constant outflow eventually leads to emptiness. This revelation transforms how we conceptualize giving. The watershed moment in my understanding came when I realized that sustainable impact requires resource management. The most effective givers aren't those who distribute their energy indiscriminately, but those who preserve, invest, and release their resources with intention and timing. They understand that strategic conservation isn't selfishness. It's the foundation of long-term effectiveness. The concept of strategic selfishness often triggers resistance because we've been culturally programmed to see any form of self-prioritization as negative. But this perspective represents a profound misunderstanding of sustainable contribution. What appears selfish in the moment, setting boundaries, declining requests, preserving your energy, often enables greater generosity in the long term. You cannot pour from an empty cup, no matter how sincere your intentions. This mindset shift isn't about becoming cold or uncaring. It's about acknowledging the reality that your resources are finite and worthy of protection. The journey towards sustainable impact requires distinguishing between meaningful sacrifices that align with your deepest values and mindless depletion that serves neither you nor those you hope to help. Perhaps the most radical revelation is recognizing that unconditional giving isn't the virtue we've been taught to believe. In its most extreme form, it becomes what Machiavelli might call slow suicide, the gradual surrender of your vital energy until nothing remains. This isn't dramatic hyperbole, it's the lived reality of countless individuals who've depleted themselves beyond recovery in the name of selflessness. The wisest among us understand the rhythm of engagement and withdrawal. They know when to step forward with full presence and when to retreat completely to restore their reserves. This conscious oscillation between giving and regenerating isn't selfish. It's the essence of sustainable impact. Just as the heart must both contract and relax to function properly, you must both engage and disengage to maintain your capacity for meaningful contribution. I observed this principle beautifully demonstrated by a mentor who built a remarkable legacy of positive impact while maintaining strong boundaries. When asked how she sustained her energy through decades of challenging work, she said simply, "I never confuse importance with urgency, and I never sacrifice tomorrow's impact for today's demands." This clarity allowed her not just to survive, but to thrive, expanding her influence precisely because she safeguarded her resources. This counterintuitive truth leads us to an even deeper exploration of how virtue itself can be transformed from a passive quality into an active force. Because true impact doesn't come from wearing kindness as a fragile crown. It comes from wielding it as a Precision instrument exactly when and where it will create maximum effect. If you're recognizing the need to treat your kindness as a precious resource rather than an infinite supply, write in the comments, "Preserving my energy." I want to know how many are awakening to this vital understanding. Truth number 5 fundamentally transforms how we conceptualize virtue itself. Most people have been taught to view virtues like kindness, compassion, and generosity as passive qualities, crowns to be worn and displayed for all to see. But the revolutionary insight Machiavelli offered is that virtue becomes truly powerful only when wielded like a precision sword, drawn deliberately at strategic moments to create specific outcomes. This perspective shift illuminates why some of history's most impactful figures weren't merely nice people, but strategic wielders of virtue. Consider Martin Luther King Jr. His approach wasn't random kindness distributed without focus. His deployment of patience and compassion was precisely calibrated to expose systemic injustice. When he practiced nonviolence in the face of brutality, it wasn't passive submission, but a deliberate tactic that created a moral contrast impossible to ignore. His kindness was not weakness, it was a weapon that changed history. Mother Teresa offers another remarkable example of this principle in action. She didn't attempt the impossible task of helping everyone everywhere, an approach that would have diluted her impact to insignificance. Instead, she made the calculated decision to focus her compassion on the poorest of the poor. This strategic concentration of her limited resources allowed her to create profound change within a specific domain rather than superficial impact across many. The revelation here is that her effectiveness came not just from her compassion, but from her willingness to make strategic choices about where and how that compassion would be expressed. Behind the scenes of these iconic examples lies a fundamental truth about human influence. Diffuse virtue creates minimal impact, while focused virtue creates transformational change. The watershed moment in understanding this principle comes when you realize that random acts of kindness, while pleasant, rarely create structural transformation. Strategic deployment of the same kindness, concentrated at key leverage points, can reshape entire systems. This insight directly challenges our cultural programming about virtue. We've been conditioned to believe that goodness should be automatic, unconditional, and indiscriminate. The revolutionary perspective suggests instead that the highest form of virtue is deliberate, conditional, and precisely targeted. This isn't about becoming less virtuous, it's about becoming more effective with the virtue you already possess. Perhaps the most liberating aspect of this truth is the shift from fear-based kindness to choice-based kindness. When you act from kindness because you're afraid of disapproval or conflict, that kindness becomes a prison that drains your power. When you act from kindness as a deliberate choice, knowing you could choose otherwise, that same kindness becomes a force that amplifies your strength and impact. I witnessed this distinction crystallized in a remarkable leader who was known for both his compassion and his formidable boundaries. When asked about this apparent contradiction, he explained, "My kindness isn't automatic, it's chosen, and what we choose, we can direct." This clarity transformed not just how others perceived his generosity, but how he experienced it himself. Not as an obligation, but as a precision instrument he wielded by choice. This mindset revolution leads us to an even deeper understanding about the nature of gratitude itself and why the appreciation we expect from others often disappears faster than we could possibly imagine. If you're ready to transform your kindness from a passive quality into a strategic force, write in the comments, "Kindness by choice." I want to know how many are embracing this powerful shift in perspective.